Here's a CNC build that I just recently put together. It's actually, the project started about 2 years ago, where I started acquiring the components for it, but I didn't actually start the conversion until a couple weeks ago. The servo panel and box, I did start this a while back. So it was on the machine, but the machine was still manual with dovetails. Went with these, they're the, I believe, Yasawaka or knockoff. They're BST servo, AC servo amplifiers and servos. For the top, there's a 2.6 kilowatt Z-axis with a brake. You can see this plug in there for a brake, so I didn't have to put a counterweight on the back. The counterweight just adds more bulk to the whole build. For the linear rails on the Z-axis, I use the HDR30, and I set it up with some pins along the rail to keep them straight. For the table, I actually machined, you probably can't see it, my camera's really bad, but I machined an edge stop along here for the rails. So all the rails kind of self-align. I even lucked out where the holes on the end fit perfect for the block here. So I extended the rails off the base, opened up the base all the way. You don't want to ever break this free on the casting. Perhaps if you have a full like epoxy granite, which eventually I may do that, or I actually might make a mold for an extended base in epoxy granite. So I built these extensions, and I made all of this face the front of the casting here. I faced it off with a large end mill, put a step in it, and I bolted all of this up. So there's 6 3/8 fasteners going into the face, and then you can see there's an 8mm down in here that goes onto each side, and then there's I used 2 instead of 3. I didn't use this top one because of the rail bolt, so I just used these 2 and then these 2 here, and I put it all together, and then I surfaced it from the main base across here. Here we have 1.2 kilowatt AC servos. So we have the 30 rails, and then we have 25 rails. Now, if I had to replan this again, I probably would have went with 20s for the x-axis. It's incredibly rigid the way it is. And frankly, 20s probably wouldn't have made a huge difference in height. But I may have been able to use the cast, the original cast saddle. That would have kept that a lot thinner. And you can get away with the cast saddle being thinner. It's a decent material. So I haven't decided if I'm going to worry about that later or not. I still have a solid 20 inches of Z-axis travel, so it's not a big deal. So then I have this Haas HA5C, and I took it apart, took out the DC servo, and I put a 600 watt version of the NEMA 24 of these in here. Ironically, we had gotten this with a machine. They're very expensive, so I'm sure a lot of people aren't going to use them for a hobby machine. But when we got it, it said it had issues with it. But I took it apart. There was a coupler in here that was cracked and broken. So the actual program of the machine was fine. So I made an adapter because the new servo is longer, and then I made this box so that these connectors would just easily, rather than have them hanging out, that way I can disconnect real easy if I need to and remove. So there's your 5C 4-axis. It works really well. These are what I use for couplers. They're pretty solid for Chinese ones. They were actually in better condition than my brand name ones I had sitting here, so I ended up going with those. For the Z-axis, I actually made one, and I didn't use the slitting saw because the machine I needed to use it with was down, so I actually ended up sawzalling the slits in there, but they worked. And then I put some extra reinforcement and alignment. I did put some set screws all around the outside, so I was able to make use of keeping that centered and balanced. The head spacer, I actually had this made, I don't know, a year or so ago. I made it on a lathe, and probably close to 2 years ago. This was supposed to actually be flipped around the other way because I was actually going to make a epoxy granite head with a BT30 spindle, and I may someday do that, but I ended up using the spacer in this case because the cast iron one wasn't thick enough to extend the head out to compensate for some of the table extension. Now, these extenders here did not give me a lot more travel. This machine already had about 11 inches of travel. Right now, I think I'm getting 13¼ inches of travel. So with the linear rails, you have to have a little extra length. So I would have still needed to be, probably out this far just to keep the factory travel. So there's where the build's at. Next video, hopefully I have it all running.